Well, hello, guys. Now that you have read through chapter one, I felt like I should go back and put a little video on YouTube for you regarding this unit. So, chapter one deals with kind of the history of psychology, its origins, some of the important names, and to be perfectly honest, a lot of this stuff we're going to kind of go over little by little throughout the entire course. But nonetheless, here we go, all right? So, psychology has two really important um, subjects that kind of feed into it. You have philosophy, and then in a few moments, we'll get into biology, okay? But in terms of philosophy, you have names like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and so forth and so on. Believe it or not, the AP exam in May will ask you some of these names, okay? So if we take a look at that first bullet there, Socrates and Plato, their belief was that knowledge is innate, like you're born with it, okay? So that kind of leans on the programming side, or what we would say today as being genetic. Okay, so Socrates and Plato would be on the side of biology. You're hardwired for particular thoughts and emotions. That would be the nature side of the coin. So that's always a big running theme here in this class: nature and nurture. Okay. Now on the flip side, if you look at that second bullet, Aristotle believes knowledge is acquired through experience. That's a lot more like the nurture side. So, like I said, they're going to ask you these things, and it might seem trivial, but the test is kind of hard. So you have to get, beyond that. Okay. So let's see here. My little hint, because I am the king of stupid hints. Socrates, that starts with an S, so that's like science, like biology, so that would be your nature. Okay? Ite. Kind of keeping on with the theme of philosophy. I'm not going to read through this whole slide, but you have names like Bacon and Locke, Enlightenment, and so forth and so on. But you see a picture in that upper corner of a kid getting spanked, right? And that's that's a bit extreme, I suppose. But that's kind of like I said a moment ago. That's kind of in line with this modern nurture or behaviorism, right? Behaviorism is a big thing that we'll obviously get to, not just in this chapter, but in future chapters. Kind of moving onward, what exactly is psychology here? So that leads us to the late 1800s, and a guy that we learned about last semester named Wilhelm Wundt. This is important, guys. This is really important. So you see two names there in red, Weber and Fechner. Wilhelm Wundt studied under Weber and Fechner, and Weber and Fechner were studying the senses and the brain, things that are a little bit more on the side of biology or biophysics, if you will, senses, that kind of thing, right? So that's where Wilhelm Wundt came into. He was this up and coming guy studying under them, and he too was interested in the senses and the brain and more of the anatomy kind of approach. But he was the first guy that coined the word psychology. So that's the start, boys. That is the start. So you would say Wilhelm Wundt is the father of psychology, and specifically his branch of psychology is something known as structuralism. So here's my dumb little hint, right? Because like I said, I'm the king of dumb little hints. Structures are what you study in anatomy. So like I was saying, Wilhelm Wundt, that was that's how he was molded. He was studying the anatomy and the senses, specifically of the brain. There's really no such thing as structuralism today in terms of modern psychology. However, as you see, like at the last bullet there is cognitive psychology. So that's kind of the evolution of where structuralism went, and that's also on the AP exam. They might ask you like, structuralism is similar to which branch of modern psychology, and you would say, okay, cognitive. Okay. Anyways, after the fact, a few years later, 1890 or so, you have a dude named William James, who also started claiming to be a psychologist, but his branch of psychology was a little bit different. He was focusing on evolution. Again, you need to recall that Charles Darwin, mid 1800s and later 1800s, he really made a big name for himself, and he stirred the pot. So if animals evolve to have certain features, well, can we say the same thing about our behaviors? And I put a few little examples there, things that William James perhaps would have thought about, like why do bears hibernate? Why will cats eat fish from an aquarium? What are some of the mating rituals of various animals? Do these behaviors pertain to humans? So yeah, we definitely do have behaviors that are biological. If you give somebody testosterone, they perhaps will act a certain way. You get an animal fixed, and that's going to affect behaviors. So for sure, biology affects behavior. And one of the great mantras in this class is that almost everything psychological is simultaneously biological. So these two subjects go hand in hand. And that's also something similar to what I said just a few moments ago. I said there were two subjects that really led to the creation of psychology, and that was philosophy, like I mentioned earlier, Socrates and Aristotle and so forth, and also biology. Like many of the early psychologists, Wilhelm Wundt, for example, got their start as biologists. Or perhaps they were medical doctors like Sigmund Freud. Okay? So my stupid hint here for functionalism, which is what William James came up with, my hint is, functionalism is about the evolution of our behaviors, right? So my hint, my name is James, just like there's William James here, hint, hint, wink, wink, and I also teach a course called Evolution. So there's a hint for that as well, okay? So we got structuralism and we got functionalism. But psychology, man, to be honest, I know I said this a lot more last semester, but psychology at this point was like a fringe subject. It'd be like telling your mom or dad, like, hey, I want to go study ghosts, or I want to study UFOs. I mean, like, people are going to kind of look down on you, you know what I'm saying? So psychology was kind of on the fringe. It really wasn't until we moved forward quite a few years, couple decades at least, before behaviorism took off. And I used the word behaviorism a minute ago, kind of leaning on the side of nurture. You might recall Watson in his test subject, Little Albert. Some of that might seem unethical, but at the same time, there were experiments involved. And experiments, of course, give you data. And that's really what the scientific method is all about, okay? So kind of moving onward, you have Gestalt psychology, dealing with perception. I know last semester we talked about optical illusions and some of those things. The name there, the father, rather, of Gestalt psychology is a dude named Max Wertheimer. Okay, psychoanalytic psychology, that would be what Freud teaches us. These buzzwords here. This is really important in AP Psych. You gotta pay attention to the buzzwords. So you see the word unconscious. Okay, conflicts, trauma, childhood issues, oftentimes. Right. So Freud focuses on like the mom, the dad issues, those types of things that are resulting from childhood unresolved conflicts. Those are big kind of Freudian buzzwords there once again, okay? There's also a branch called psychodynamic psychology, and these are all the people who kind of came after Freud. And, we talked about this a lot last semester. We'll talk about it a lot more this semester, but names like Carl Jung and Alfred Adler, just to give you a couple, okay? Then you have humanistic psychology, and a buzzword for humanistic psychology would be self-esteem. Another one would be free will, things along those lines. So that would be Abraham Maslow. Okay, hopefully you recall his hierarchy of needs, and then his he had a sidekick. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but he had a sidekick named Carl Rogers. I really hope you recall some of these names from last semester, but if not, obviously we'll cover this a lot more down the road. Okay. And then, like I said, there are other approaches to psychology, cognitive being one of them, okay? So kind of backtracking here, what is psychology? We mentioned earlier that there was Wilhelm Wundt. He came up with structuralism, kind of the structures, the anatomy of the brain, the senses. But along the way, he came up with an idea of introspection, kind of thinking what makes me tick? Who am I? And this is interesting, and it is really, really important, okay, to reflect and to meditate. And those are all great things, but that's not really sciencey. I know that's a weird word, sciencey, but it's not really sciencey. Just talking about feelings is not necessarily science. That's therapy, that's great, but that's not science. That's why 100 years ago, or more than 100 years ago rather, psychology was a fringe subject, okay? You see that middle bolt there where science became observable. That's where it became sciency with the behaviorists like Skinner, Watson, Pavlov. Of course, Pavlov worked with dogs. The dude that everyone forgets about is Thorndike. He's another important behaviorist. Thorndike came up with the law of effect. We covered that a little bit last semester, and we'll touch on that much more later on down the road, okay? And as I always say, we really shouldn't have nature versus nurture. The two go hand in hand. You nurture the nature. Like I said a little bit last semester, if I have a dude on my basketball team who's 6'11", I'm probably going to teach him how to be a post more so than a point guard. So I'm going to nurture. I'm going to raise you in a certain way where your gifts are going to be showcased. And your gifts, of course, would be biological, genetic. So this fella here, Titchener, is a student or a sidekick of Wundt. So again, that kind of reemphasizes the term structuralism and the other term I mentioned a second ago, introspection, this self-reflective approach. Okay? But this kind of struggled, right? It struggled to take root. And that's why I put in red there, that's why behaviorism really was a big deal later on in this course, because it introduced the scientific method. And in doing so, it took psychology from a fringe subject to something a little bit more mainstream. Okay, so there's a little bit more on Wundt. Moving on, we said earlier that William James is the father of functionalism, so he came out a few years after Wilhelm Wundt. And this guy gets credit for writing the first psychology textbook. And AP will ask you about that, okay? And again, I mentioned this idea, the scientific method, the look, test, conclude kind of approach. But once again, boys, that's next chapter, okay? So here you see just a kind of a variety of some of the fields here, and I use the word eclectic. That means there's this great variety. A lot of these we've covered in passing last semester, and of course we'll cover many more of these in due time over the next couple of months. But if you look at that third bullet there, cognitive psychology, I've used that word a couple of times already. You'll notice I underlined the word think. So in AP psychology, there are certain buzzwords that you just have to be aware of all the time. So if they give you a question and it says, Susie is thinking about applying for a job, which branch of psychology is she relying on? That might sound like a silly question, right? But did you notice I use the word thinking in that question? So 100% of the time, if you see the word think, we're talking about cognitive psychology. Similarly, and I said this earlier, if we're using the word self-esteem or free will, something along those lines, we're always dealing with humanistic psychology. And if you kind of scooch down a little bit, you see where it says personality and psychodynamic. Earlier in this lesson, I used the word psychoanalytic. So if we're ever using the word childhood conflict or unconscious urges, anything along those lines, that 100% of the time on that test, that will always be psychoanalytic or psychodynamic psychology. Okay? I hope you recall some of these names, like social psychology, names like Milgram, Zimbardo, Solomon Asch, Muzaffar Sharif. And if you forgot, it's okay. We'll cover this in due time, okay? And let's see, industrial organizational psychology. I know some of y'all came to the presentation we had earlier last semester when Trey Gonzalez, one of our former students, showed up and gave a talk about his graduate work. And he was also the guy that's the country music star. So there's that. Now, one of the things about this class that can come back and haunt you if you don't pay attention is the names. I would almost recommend getting note cards. I'm dead serious here. This is my AP hint of the day right here. I would get note cards and just start jotting down names and keep a kind of a running tab of names, okay? So Darwin, I mentioned him earlier, evolution, yada, yada, yada. Fair enough. But here we have a gal named Calkins. She studied under William James. That's important. Again, William James, 1890, the father of functionalism, wrote the first textbook, came out after Wilhelm Wundt, okay? Mary Calkins is the first female president of the APA, the American Psychological Association. So she is the first female president of that society. They're going to ask you about that, okay? Let's see what else. Some of this I can kind of skip through quickly. I mentioned Freud already. G. Stanley Hall, they're going to ask you about that. So he is the first president of the APA. So he's the first president. Like I said, Calkins was the first female president. So two different questions there that they're going to ask you about. William James, I mentioned him already. Functionalism, evolution, a little bit there. Pavlov, I mentioned that name earlier in this presentation as well. He is a big name for learning or behaviorism. If you recall, he's the one who worked with dogs and got dogs to drool and ring a bell. Okay, fair enough, fair enough. And again, Freud, those are all pictures of Freud's faces. Ha, 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 whatever. I'm a big dork. Like I said, on your presentations, guys, feel free to put memes or whatever. If it helps you learn stuff, then by all means, do it, all right? So remember, Freud always talks about those mommy issues, hence why this meme is kind of funny, all right? More names. Piaget, that's a big name for cognitive as well as child developmental psychology. Words like assimilation and accommodation and schemas. I made a video a while back about Piaget, and I was talking about, what was it? Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit, how we sometimes assimilate and accommodate the wrong lyrics to songs. Carl Rogers was, like I said earlier, a sidekick of Maslow. He brought humanistic psychology to a form of therapy called client-centered therapy. Hopefully you guys remember all that. And if not, we'll cover it in more detail. Skinner is a behaviorist. He worked with rats, whereas Pavlov worked with dogs. Okay. Let's see. Washburn, first woman awarded a PhD in psychology. That's important too. I'll come back to that in just a second, okay? Watson, I mentioned him earlier, another behaviorist. Thorndike, another behaviorist. I put a question mark there because everyone forgets about poor Thorndike. But that was the guy that came up with law of effect. Hopefully you guys remember that from last semester. And there's Wilhelm Wundt once again. Okay, so here's my stupid hint for remembering these two important women in this unit, okay? We got Calkins and Washburn. There are a lot of names in this unit, okay? And I hope most of these names you kind of remember, that's my hope. But these two names might be new to you guys, Calkins and Washburn. So how do you remember which one is which? So my dumb hint, remember I said Calkins is the first female president of the APA. Okay? So just remember, Calkins in alphabetical order is closer to A as in APA than Washburn is. Again, that's a weird hint, but that's the best one I got. And it might work. I've got guys every year that come back and tell me, I can remember Calkins as opposed to Washburn because C is closer to A for APA. All right? Fair enough. And then there's your crash course video. Whatever. I'm done, guys. I'll make a video for Unit 2 in a little bit, but until next time, peace out and God bless.